Welcome along to Tweet Street Scotland Occupied. I'm Cinnamon Bridges, aka Peter. Tonight it's our Parents Forum, our January Parents Forum, not with my child. We had a Parents Forum in December announcing that we would be going to be trying to have one in January, February and March of this year. So this is the first of those. We do have some guest speakers this evening. We have to apologise because some people haven't been able to make it this evening. So first things first, I'll give you the list of speakers who will be attending. We've got Denise Finlay, Caroline McAllister, Lucy for Parents Across Scotland, Alan Petrie and Stella O'Malley will be joining us. We also have to apologise for Councillor Michelle Ferns, Eva Comrie and Kerry Black are unable to come. Kerry due to coronavirus. With me as co-host this evening is Eileen Spence. Hi Eileen, how you doing?
How you doing, Peter?
Right, so I'm just going to pass it over to you as the headmistress this evening. If you can, if you can invite our first speaker.
Is that Alan?
That's Alan. That's so. I'll pass it over to you, Eileen.
Right. Well, good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming along. And you know, when we were planning this, what had happened was I'd actually seen that brilliant letter that Alan Petrie had put up. And to my shame, I had always had it in my mind about children with special educational needs and how sex education and things like that were going to affect them. Right? And that was a particular worry for me. But it had completely slipped my mind about children who need 24-hour care, right? Who are maybe at homes or, you know, who are living at home, still needing 24-hour care, and carers come into them. That had slipped my mind. And when I read Alan's passionate, powerful letter, I was really quite emotional. So I had got in touch with him and asked if he would like to come along, you know, and speak to us and tell us what it's like, you know, from his point of view and what his reservations are and what his fears are and how he thinks, you know, that we could help in order to amplify this and let the Scottish Government know, sorry, this just is not good enough and we're not having it with our children. So without any further ado, Alan, good evening. How are you?
Hi, thank you for having me on tonight. My name is Alan Petrie. I'm a full-time carer and I'm a kinship carer for 3 of my grandchildren. One of my grandchildren, Megan, has a very serious medical condition called FOXG1 syndrome, which is quite rare. There's 700 cases worldwide. The FOX gene is the first gene to develop in the body, which develops the brain. And because this gene isn't working properly, the agenesis of the corpus callosum isn't there, so it's missing. So the two sides of the brain aren't talking to one another. So Megan can't walk, can't talk. She can eat slightly, but not enough to survive. So she's also tube fed. She can't sit independently. She can't roll. So everything has to be done for her. Now I have 2 carers to come in and help with Megan, but that took a long time. I mean, I took a stroke in April last year, and I didn't get any carer until it was just before December this year. So it shows the Scottish Government's priorities, where they're not prioritising the people who are really needing the help. Now, Megan requires real intimate care. Now, this is very difficult if you don't know Megan. And it is very important that it's the same sex, not someone who thinks they're the same sex as Megan, but someone who is biologically the same sex. It's called dignity for our children. I mean, the Scottish Government tried to bring in the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. By allowing a man to change a child who is a female is against that convention. It's got to be against that convention. So they're going against things that they tried to bring in themselves, which is unacceptable. But it's not just that. When we go out for an outing, we have to do 2 things. One, check the internet for changing room facilities, because they're very scarce in Scotland. Again, the Scottish Government aren't investing in things for disabled people. Changing rooms are toilets, but they have hoist facilities and plinths that you're able to put a bigger child onto so that it could be changed. So what we have to do is, if we can't get the changing rooms, I have to take 2 carers with me, 2 female carers, to go into toilets, but disabled toilets aren't big enough for a wheelchair user and 2 carers, because it's a 2-man lift to get her onto the floor. Also have to bring a blanket to go on a dirty toilet floor. So we've got to lift her up, put her onto the floor to change her. The last thing I want is a man walking through a toilet door with my granddaughter lying there extremely vulnerable. That's just not acceptable.
Yes.
And again, it shows the priorities where the Scottish Government are putting all their attention onto the GRA and not dealing with issues that have been there for a long, long time. Because it's not just yesterday that disabled people have had difficulty getting changed when they're out and about. It's not inclusive for them. They're being restricted. We're restricted from where we could go, and it's just unacceptable. But the one thing that raised my concerns, and it was concerns that I had but I couldn't prove, was when I put that letter online. The ones who were coming up opposing it weren't the trans, or what people think are trans. It was the kink brigade, the
Yes.
ones with porn on their Twitter accounts. That's the ones that we are terrified of coming into and abusing that system. I mean, the Scottish Government have said that there is safeguarding put in place that you've got to promise to live as the sex that you decide to live with. But then that goes against the whole point of that policy that they're bringing in the law, because they're saying that you've got to be able to live in the body that you believe you're in. So that could change. And that's what the kink brigade are telling us. That could change all the time. So you could have a man who is just perving into women's toilets or women's facilities for that own reason and get away with it. Now, it was quite interesting today. I got a letter from the council asking me to apply for transport for Megan going to school. Now, we get this every year, but within that letter, I'm asked for evidence of Megan's disability. A man will not be asked for evidence for him going into women-only facilities. It is ridiculous. Now, and I think today is quite appropriate for being here because it's Burns night. And Burns had a man's a man for all that. And that was all about what it means to be a man. And I think now men have to take a stance along with our women, because we cannot allow our daughters, our granddaughters, our wives, our mothers, our sisters' rights to be taken away from this government. And it is atrocious that as a woman we're having to fight to defend these rights against. It is ridiculous. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alan.
Alan, can I ask what age your granddaughter is?
Megan's 12. She'll be 13 in April.
Right. And also, I mean, there's a possibility as well that quite soon she could start menstruating.
Yes.
Right. And if you've got her out and she needs disabled facilities, it's absolutely so important that she's going to have privacy. Right.
Yep.
And she's going to be able to get a female, to deal with this for her. Right. It must be female carers. Right. And it's not right. And this should not be imposed on us. And it particularly should not be imposed on our children who are amongst the most vulnerable on the planet. That's the kids that are needing this 24-hour care. It's wrong. And in my opinion, it's evil, Alan. And I am just so grateful that you brought this up. I really am. As I say, I was very, very touched by your letter. And I think everybody are. And thank you so much for letting us know just a snippet, right, of what you're experiencing, just like, for example, on a day out. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. I have to second that and say thank you also. We're going to move on. The next speaker is somebody that I've heard numerous occasions, and if I'm honest, it was this lady that kind of initiated my inquiries, so to speak, to a certain extent on the women's side of things before it was into the kids' side of things. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Alibus Caroline McAllister to speak. Caroline, over to you.
Thank you and good evening, and thanks for inviting me on here tonight. Before I start, I would just like to quote a little bit of Burns, which I think is very apt, especially at this time. While Europe's eye is fixed on mighty things, the fate of empires and the fall of kings, while quacks of state must each produce his plan, and even children lisp the rights of man, amid this mighty fuss, just let me mention the rights of women merit some attention. And I would like to send that message to the Scottish Government, because at the moment they're ignoring women and children's rights. I don't recognise Scotland these days.
Yeah.
I feel we've regressed decades in the last 5 or so years. It's like all the progress that we made in terms of science, safeguarding of children and young people, and especially our vulnerable. All those lessons learned over those decades and all that best practice has been ripped up and binned. We have SNP MPs signing a letter effectively calling on the criminalisation of therapists if they do their jobs professionally and explore any underlying issues. This despite WPATH stating explorative therapy is best practice. Affirmation without exception, a slogan that is now the established practice of most, if not all, of our services that are supposed to be designed to help our young. But I suppose there's a certain inevitability to slogans becoming policy when the government abrogates its responsibilities to lobby groups and activists and ignores experts and professionals. When they ignore laws and plough ahead implementing self-ID by stealth, ignoring the exemptions in the Equality Act and publishing school guidance that's flawed, riddled with inaccuracies and probably unlawful. I'll take you back to June 2019 when Shirley Ann Somerville stood in the Scottish Chamber at Holyrood and admitted that the LGBT school guidance was unlawful. It disproportionately impacted girls and young women. And she said at that time that the guidance would be withdrawn. However, that wasn't the case because a number of local authorities continued to use that unlawful guidance in the full knowledge that it was that it detrimentally impacted women and girls, or young women and girls, and the government did nothing about that. We've had parents angry at the removal of single-sex toilets and providing unisex facilities in high schools. Their disregard for children and young people's needs, their need for privacy and dignity, especially young women and girls. The government appears to be incapable of joined-up thinking. They addressed period poverty only for them to place another barrier in the way of girls and young women getting an education. We know girls and young women are missing school because they're too embarrassed to use unisex toilets, especially if they're menstruating. Boys and girls aren't taking on fluids during the school day because they're avoiding using unisex facilities because it leaves them deeply uncomfortable. And it's deeply worrying that safeguarding measures are being dismantled as men's wishes are clearly prioritised over women and girls' needs by our government. We have a huge problem in Scotland with child sexual abuse and domestic violence, yet the government are fixated on issues that leave vulnerable children and young people more exposed. Sexual assaults in schools are a serious issue. We've got 40% of young women reported to have been sexually harassed in school. Children are becoming addicted to porn. I heard of an 8-year-old who was addicted to porn, and this is a huge issue of concern. And what are the government doing about it? I don't see them ever speak of these issues of grave concern. I'll tell you what they're doing. They're gaslighting the nation. They're dismantling our boundaries, all against our will. We've recently had the school census scandal which exposed the overreach of government's tentacles into family private life and the intrusion into young people's lives. They misled children and young people into believing it was an anonymous survey, when in fact it wasn't. Even Scotland's Children and Young People Commissioners called for a pause, but that was ignored. So who are the government listening to? It seems, as I've just stated, activists and lobby groups. And then at the weekend, it was revealed, after the scandal of the school census, it was revealed that young people and children are being quizzed on their sexuality as part of the free bus pass process. And I have to ask myself why. Why is our government so fixated on our young people's sexuality and sex life? We've also got the scandal of some of the content of the materials of the relationship and sex education, promoting porn, for example, is promoted as fun, despite the problems that are happening in society with young people addicted to porn, with young people believing that violence is part of a loving sexual relationship, because that's what they're seeing online from a very, very early age. They're using coercive materials which promote anal sex. And that just, to me, blows my mind. And when you start to look at all these different strands, a very, very worrying picture starts to arise. Certainly, I find it very worrying. I've worked in safeguarding for 30 years. Safeguarding is about assuming the worst scenario and trying to protect against that. What's happening in Scotland is the complete opposite. All of our boundaries, all of the safeguarding that's in place is being dismantled. And I'll leave it there at the moment because I do appreciate that time is ticking by. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Caroline. Caroline, I know that you've done an awful lot of work. As I say, I've seen a lot of the things that you've done. You've been out doing stalls, etc. Do you feel yourself that even though the government aren't listening, the grassroots movement, and include yourself in the grassroots movement, people on the ground are making an impact?
Yeah, I believe there has been a massive shift in the last year, especially. I think in some respects, a lot of people with lockdown because of COVID engaged more online. And I think that a lot more people are aware that there is this issue. We've had some press coverage and hopefully that will continue to increase, because this is a massive, massive society. This is the issue for society. This is about destroying our social conventions. There might not be laws in place that stop men in women's toilets, but there are social conventions, and these are all just being swept aside. So my experience, and certainly feedback that I get, is that people know a little bit about it, but they don't understand the full implications. However, when you start to talk about the implications of it all, they very quickly get it. Because I'll just finish by saying that I think the stalls are really effective. It's not just stalls, there's literature, there's postcards getting put into newspapers and put through people's doors. And I think that's really effective in raising awareness with the public. And that will continue, because we're at the point now with the GRA bill coming before the Parliament in February. I think it's really important that all of wider society understands the implications for this, because we're all brought up, we all want to be kind, we don't want to discriminate against anybody, but the changes of what's acceptable now under the trans umbrella is quite frightening. It's not about transsexual people. It's about, as Alan mentioned earlier, people with kinks and fetishes, etc. And I'm not judging them. What consenting adults do behind closed doors is none of my business. Yes. But don't bring it into public life. And I'll finish there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Caroline. Eileen, it's over to you to introduce our next speaker, who I believe is Grace Brodie herself.
Oh, right. Looking forward to this, Grace. Now, thanks very much for taking part, and you've got the floor.
So Grace is Denise Finlay, for anybody who doesn't know. Denise, over to you for your address, please.
Yeah, hello everybody. So yes, I think we've been talking about this for quite some time, for many years. And to answer the question that you were posing to Caroline, I have noticed a big change over the last year. People are becoming much more aware of the implications. And I think some of the problems is that it's just quite unbelievable. Most people can't really believe it. And when you say no, like, I'll give you an example. My hairdresser is Muslim, and she tells me that she wouldn't be able to cut a man's hair. And I said, if a man came in here saying he's a woman, then you would have to cut his hair, or maybe he would report you for a hate crime. So, this is a situation that we're in now, where things that are quite unbelievable are now happening in Scotland. this isn't really about the children. I don't think anybody has paid the slightest attention to the needs of the religious communities.
Yes.
None
Yes.
whatsoever, you know. But this one in particular is about children. So just to talk about that a little bit. So firstly, the ideology is very dangerous. It's been imposed on them in schools and very confusing for the children. And not only that, I think that it takes parents to some extent out of the picture. And now the child at school can be transitioned, could say, well, I'm a girl or I'm a boy, and then their parents don't even get told. And it might, I read something about a parent whose child, was on puberty blockers, and the parent didn't really have any choice in the matter. So there's that problem, and it's the ideology is getting told to them at school. Now, we talked to a woman that's detransitioned who's very brave, Sinead Watson, and she came out, she was telling us about her experiences, and it really seemed to be like she had some trauma at the age of 14, which is one of those developmental ages, and this affected her, and also that she was lesbian. And she wasn't comfortable about being lesbian. And the interesting thing I thought from her discussion actually was how much homophobia there is against lesbians, that lesbians get a lot of homophobia. And, now you think we're progressive, and accepting, but actually that's something that really should be addressed, because lesbians seem to come in for a lot of homophobia. So she then, transitioned, and she had got no counselling. It was underlying problems that she had, and she got no counselling for it. And she had a double mastectomy down in England, and then of course she regretted that, and she detransitioned, and now the woman is a saint. She is absolutely helping all these other troubled youngsters who are various stages of transition. Some of them have gone as far as having hysterectomies, and this ideology that we are forcing on children in school from a young age, from primary school.
Yes.
We're forcing on children. They're creating all these very, very unhappy, troubled young people who are taking testosterone, who are taking puberty blockers, who are having double mastectomies, who are having hysterectomies. And these are healthy children. And they're trying to solve mental problems that are caused by trauma or other issues, perhaps autism, seeing homophobia in the world and being a homosexual, trauma, and they cannot solve these problems by these physical solutions of drugs and chemicals and surgeries that have consequences and lead to more and more surgeries. So this is the danger our children are in. We're putting our children in danger. The government is putting our children in danger. So that is like horrendous, really. And the amount of girls being referred to the gender clinics. Now, you were talking about pornography. And if you're a young girl these days, I'm telling you, when I was a young girl, we were much more shielded because we didn't have the internet and we didn't have the pornography there is today. If I didn't fancy the idea of sex at all when I first heard about it, I cannot imagine how girls cope with some of the things that we were talking about, like strangulation and violent pornography, and seeing this kind of stuff. It's no wonder they don't want to be female. It's just no wonder they don't want to be female. So I think that we need to protect them. We need to protect these children. And the other side of it on the sex surveys, so there are a couple of things I'd like to say about the sex surveys and the bus pass. This is data gathering
Yes.
exercise.
Data mining.
Yeah, these children are identifiable. The privacy notice that the Scottish Government has put out with their sex survey, and it's similar on this bus pass, they say the data may be shared. The privacy notice with the Scottish Government's sex survey, they actually take away the children's rights. So everyone has rights under the General Data Protection Regulation, which is incorporated into UK law. So they have a right, for example, to see what data is held on them. But the Scottish Government's privacy notice says, no, they're not again allowed to see what data is held on them. They have a right to be forgotten. This is deletion, not according to the Scottish Government, not for this data. They have a right to object to processing. That's how the data would be used, not for this data. They give the candidate number, and in the privacy notice, it says linkage, which means the data can be linked to data in other databases. So the child is identifiable, and the child is identifiable for the rest of their life. And it does not say which third parties this data is used by or can access this data. So in 10 years' time, a child who said that they smoked, took drugs when they were 14 and had sex, that data is there for third-party agencies, and we don't know who, and there's no guarantee who may access that data. So it's totally undermining. So this is not just sex, this is not the gender ideology that they're forcing on the child. It is the child's rights. It's the child's right to data protection right, privacy rights.
It's Tweet Streets.
Denise, hold on a wee second. Sorry, can everybody ensure that they've got their mic on while the speakers are speaking, please? Thank you. Mic off, sorry.
Yeah. So it's undermining their rights. So that I find just appalling. And luckily, Neil Hanvey has written to the Information Commissioner to do an investigation of this, because I'm absolutely sure what the Scottish Government's doing here is it can't be compliant with GDPR. And then just my final comment is, yes, the world, or Scotland at least, is with us. The Scots people do not agree with allowing men into women's single-sex spaces, and they don't agree with males in women's sports, and they don't agree with coercing lesbians to have sex with men, and they really don't agree with any of it. But so we need to raise awareness of it. And when the recent survey by Murray Blackthorne Mackenzie had only about half of Scotland is aware of the actual GRA self-ID, but people are against it. So this is the great thing, because it's like an open door. If we can just let people know what's happening, then we will have support. So that's really what we have to do now. And then we have to ensure that we get enough councillors elected at the forthcoming council elections to be able to stop this, mixed sex toilets, mixed sports, changing rooms, and even the work that it does in the, the education, sex education, the survey, all that can be stopped in the council chamber. So what I would say to anybody that really cares, stand for council, stand for your local council and stop it in the council's chamber, or help elect people that will stop it in the council chamber. That's what we absolutely have to do. So yeah, that's what we must do to protect children and women. And the other just point to finish off on the man part of it, men are really against self-ID. Very much against self-ID, slightly more so than women, surprisingly enough. So so we call on men to stand for council and to support candidates that are going to protect the rights of women and children.
Thank you, Denise.
Peter,
yep.
just a couple of things to come back with Denise, which she's raised is really, really interesting. Now, attendance at kids clinics, this was for children that were felt they were suffering from gender dysphoria. Right now, before they started doing the trans ideology in schools, these clinics were seeing about 20 children a year. Right now, that has increased by 4,000%, and it's nearly all girls. 4,000%. Right. About the census, right, the school census, as you know, we had done a bit of research on that, and we'd actually found that it was a study that was going on in 17 countries, right, throughout the EU, Scotland, you know, it's one of those countries and all that kind of thing. And when we looked, none of the other countries were asking those questions. Not one of them was asking those questions about anal or oral or anything else like that. They weren't. Now, that information, you know, for Scotland is going to a database called Census, which is used by all the schools, and that that's Northern Ireland, but that keeps that information on those children from age 5, right, even though they do this census from age 8 with staged questions, right up to age 18, right? It's data mining, and it's exactly what Denise said, right? This stuff is going to go with kids for the rest of their lives. What if, you know, they let something go on that census that later in life is going to stop them getting a job, right? And they don't know why, because it's on it, right? And as I said earlier, the free bus pass thing, £250, you know, will be awarded, and they will pick out the hat. And the thing about that is, right, those bus passes are getting sent home to people's names and addresses, right? The bus pass will be posted out to their house. So whoever is processing that will have looked at the answers on that census, and they're going to know which children are sexually active. It's a paedophile's charter. That particular one is, right? The other thing is, Denise had mentioned was puberty blockers for children. I was really shocked to find out that WPATH, right, apparently they had a consultation that closed on the 16th of January, and they were actually still saying that puberty blockers are fully reversible. That's not what, you know, other people in the world are saying just now. And understand in America, there's actually a big firm of lawyers are going to be challenging this in court about puberty blockers and whether or not they're reversible. And the reason why a child is able to do these things behind a parent's back. Now, I just cannot believe that children are being encouraged to keep secrets from their parents. I mean, for me, any relationship I had with a teacher at school, that would never have happened. And it's because Scotland has already got in place something called the Age of Legal Capacity Act 1991, Section 2.4, that says, if in the opinion of the medical practitioner present, right, the child understands all the implications of the treatment, then they can have it. Now, notice the words medical practitioner. We once used to have a role in schools for somebody called a health development officer. Half of their wages were paid by the council and the other half were paid by the health board. And it kind of bomb-proofed them. Right? It meant that made them a medical practitioner. So what if, right, somebody's coming into a school, half their wages are paid by the council, half are paid by, you know, the health board or anything else like that, and they're saying this to your child behind your back, that your child, in their opinion, understands everything about taking puberty blockers. So yeah, they're going to get them. It's crazy, mental insanity.
I mean, I've just done a screen share on the Age of Legal Capacity Act there. It is very easy to find for any parents who are here that are unsure of it. Just by typing into a Google search, Age of Legal Capacity Act, and it'll bring up Scotland 1991. Then it's easy to navigate if you know what you're looking for. So we're going to try and point you in the direction of where to find some of the information, because we don't want it to be the case that it's just listening to people telling you what they think and showing you that if you have a wee search, quick Google search, you'll find information, Age of Legal Capacity Act,
But the thing is, what that was designed for was 1991. Do you remember we had AIDS like through the 80s and the 90s and all that, and they wanted to be able to give out condoms to young people who might be sexually active. Now, they were wanting to try and stop the spread of AIDS and things like that. Okay, that's fair enough. But another aspect of it was, some people actually say to me that they cannot understand the same, but you can't have sex under the age of 16. There's an age of consent here. Right? What that Age of Legal Capacity Act does is gives adult the ability to contracept a girl under the age of 16, right, behind their parents' backs. Right? And there have been, and I know this because one of the newspapers phoned me to tell me that they had found out that there were 35 girls under the age of 13 who'd had long-term contraception given to them, be that by Depo-Provera, which is the injection, or by Implanon, which was an implant, right? And I was just thinking, what are you doing? Because sex with a girl under the age of 13 is statutory rape. It carries a life sentence. And you're telling me that this has actually been done by adults to girls under the age of 13, and everybody thinks that's okay? What about abuse? What if they're being abused? Has anybody investigated that? And I just considered giving these puberty blockers when nobody knows, you know, what's going to happen, right? The effect it's going to have on the growing brain, whether it's going to bring iatrogenic disease. And do you know what? It's going to be the parents that are going to be left to deal with all of this. It'll get dumped back on parents' laps when it all blows up in their face.
Yeah, I totally agree, Eileen. I'll say thanks for the minute, Eileen. And what we'll do is we'll introduce our next guest speaker and the newest member of the Tweet Street team. We have Lucy from Parents Across Scotland, who's going to speak to us now and share her experience and a story. And when I say a story, this is a true story. So I'll pass it over to Lucy from Parents Across Scotland.
Hi, thanks, Peter. I'm just going to bring it, I suppose, from a two-pronged angle. I come at it from a parent's perspective as well as working in safeguarding and child protection. So I kind of see it from both angles, and it blends where my focus is on it, to be honest. But I'm not going to provide any stats or links or anything, because it is really just a personal perspective of what I've experienced and what my family's experienced over the last year or so. So it just basically a wee bit of background is my daughter, she's 11 now, so she's in primary 7, but she's heading into high school after the summer. And she, in primary 6, came home one day. Basically, she was really quite distressed. She told me she was being picked on, and obviously, as a mum, I've got 2 kids, and I've dealt with this before. You tugs at your heartstrings every time, but you know that you're going to be able to manage it. You support them and you deal with it. But when she was telling me about this one, there was just something that didn't sit quite comfortably with me. I knew that it was going to cause a wee bit further issues for me, and for us actually. But I think, sorry, 2 seconds, I've lost my screen here. I think at the time I wasn't as fully aware of the sort of gender ideology situation that was going on in Scotland. My job meant that I was aware and kept abreast of all the sort of legislative side of child protection and wellbeing and things that were going on with children's rights and that kind of thing. But I don't think the actual ideology itself had sort of resonated with me until it impacted my own family. And I think that's what sometimes is missing in this bit, is maybe a wee bit overlooked as well, is that we don't think about it as much until it actually impacts us and we experience it. So basically, my daughter back to her. She came home and she was explaining to us that she was being picked on in school. So we had a conversation about it, and it turned out that there was a girl, now this is primary 6 in a primary school in Scotland, and there's a girl in our class, and I'm going to use the correct sex for this child because she's a girl, regardless of anything else. I won't go into any other details about her, but she is a girl, so I'm going to use the correct sex for her. But she basically had told all the other children in the classroom that she was using a different name and she was using different pronouns. They were to call her he. At one point, I think she was going under the pronoun it. She was writing on things on social media about it. And it was happening just in the playground. In the class itself, the teachers were addressing her as her birth name and her correct sex, and she was answering to it. So it was just occurring in the playground at this stage. I went, just being a mum and the job that I do, I went and done a wee bit of digging, and I was looking on social media just trying to find out a wee bit more about what was going on. There was a couple of things that just raised a few red flags to me, so I decided just to contact the school, let them know what was happening, and just kind of raise a safeguarding concern about this other child as well, because for me, regardless of what is actually going on in this world at the minute, it is not normal. It is not a well-being concern for a young girl at the age of 10 years old to try and identify out of her sex. I just think that it raises too many red flags to not be a safeguarding concern. So I did let the school know, and things, they were actually, the handled it really well at this point, and things kind of settled down. The class teacher managed it quite well. But I decided at that point that I wasn't quite satisfied with not knowing enough about it. So I went and just kind of done a wee bit of digging, and I spoke to my local authority education department after I found their trans inclusion guidance, which we know, I think it was Caroline that said earlier, it was certainly developed by activists. It wasn't actually done through any decent or proper consultation with anyone. And we know that I know that it breached children's rights, but at the time I didn't. But I went on, found my local authority's version of it, and it was just exactly the same as the LGBT Youth Scotland guidance. So I had a fairly decent conversation with them about it, and they were quite open to actually addressing it, because I highlighted to them the issues that I'd identified, and that there was some glaring children's rights concerns throughout it that were missing, and there were some quite obvious safeguarding concerns, particularly for girls, with regards to being told that boys could enter their changing rooms and their toilets in school and things like that, and nobody was to question it. That's actually still rumbling on with the local authority. They've agreed that they're going to review their policy, and they've said that they're going to base it on they're going to review it on the basis of the transgender trend and the Sex Matters equality document that they've developed for schools. So they did say that they were going to do that. They're kind of avoiding me at the minute, so I don't know if they've actually done it, but it's something that I need to follow up with them. But basically, the summer holidays came and went. Back to the actual story. The summer holidays came and went, and my daughter returned into school, went to primary 7, quite happy. She had a great wee group of friends. She was kind of put the stuff that had happened previously behind her. But we did have to revisit it again, because what then happened was she decided that she was going to continue to be true to herself and speak truthfully. I said to her, if you want to use different pronouns for this other child, then please go ahead, but I'm going to give you the information that I think will be helpful for you to make a decision on your own. And I said to her, whatever way you want to go with it. And she said that she just felt so uncomfortable knowing that what she was having to say wasn't the truth. So we're on to the compelled speech side of things. So she decided to continue when necessary. She didn't have a lot of interactions with this other child, but she decided when necessary to continue using her name and her birth name and correct pronouns. And she was told by her class teacher, this was just a few a few months back. In fact, I think it was December. She was told by her class teacher that she had been, and this was the words that were used, she'd been caught using the wrong name and pronouns for this other child, and she went to the head teacher and had a chat. Now, from what I can gather, the head teacher actually was quite understanding, but the advice that she was given is you just maybe need to avoid using any name for her. Now, what kind of position is that for an 11-year-old child to be put in an environment where she's supposed to be thriving and flourishing, and they're supposed to be getting it right for her as well as for every other child? So I obviously didn't leave it at that, and I phoned and spoke to the school, and the conversation I had with the head teacher was actually really, really useful, and it was really helpful. They explained she's been a head teacher for over 20 years, absolutely loads and loads of experience, and she's like, we're struggling with this situation at the minute. We don't really know how to handle it, what we're meant to be doing with it. She's like, I'm trying to look into it and top everything else that I'm doing education wise for the children. She's like, teachers don't know how to respond to it, and they think that they're doing the right thing by protecting this other girl who's identifying as a boy. So we had a really good conversation, and I also sent her the transgender trend and sex matters documents, and asked her to have a look at it when she was implementing any policies that she was considering putting in place in school for this particular issue, and not just to rely on what's being provided by local government, because I think that's quite a big disconnect at the minute. Guidance being put out by government, and then local government and schools and education are just being expected to interpret it whatever way they want. And I said the other night when I was speaking to Peter that these are children's lives that we're playing with here, and we're leaving this sort of decision up to the interpretation of anybody that decides to look at a policy in a certain way. And for me, I just think it isn't good enough. My daughter was bullied. She was severely bullied in school. She was ostracised on the playground. She was excluded from games. She was told that she was unkind to the LGBT community because she wasn't going necessarily along with what she was being asked to do. And the position I think that we're in at the moment, and this is the part I think sometimes gets overlooked when we're speaking about this issue and its impact on children, is that we have such a hyper focus at the moment on a particular group of children who should be under the normal safeguarding frameworks that we have in place. But what's happening just now is that the hyper focus is on this one group, and my daughter fell through the gaps because it wasn't picked up that she was actually the one that was being bullied. I mean, there was videos of her being put on social media talking about her sexuality by this other child, and the only thing that my daughter had done was continued to call this child by the name that she'd known her as since she was in primary one. And that's, for me, the major issue. I mean, we had a big drive in Scotland, and there was a lot of momentum behind it with regards to anti-bullying in schools and Respect Me. I mean, their last campaign was just one kind word, but that has to be reflective across everybody. I mean, we've got our GIRFEC framework, which is, just for anybody that doesn't know, it is getting it right for every child, and it underpins all of the legislation we have up here around sort of child wellbeing and protection. But I feel that we may be missing something in our education at the moment, where children who are not necessarily comfortable in having their speech compelled, maybe because they don't want to do it, which is absolutely fine. They don't want to have to speak something that they know is not true. Maybe they can't do it. Maybe there is they've got additional support needs that means that they actually can't physically do something that they're being compelled to do. And I think that this part certainly isn't addressed and isn't really looked into quite as much as everything else that's surrounding it. And I just worry that we're creating a generation of children, and a generation of children coming through our education system who, on the one hand, are going to feel quite comfortable that they are protected and safe, and then you've got this other kind of group coming behind that might not necessarily be getting as much safeguarding as what they necessarily should, because we've taken our eye off the ball a wee bit, I think. And I just, there was a wee quote that, was it Michelle? It's Michelle Moore, isn't it? She's wrote the, she's done quite a lot of work, and she kind of summed it up quite well. I'll just finish off, but she said that like the concept of gender identity confuses children and young people about gender, sex and sexuality. In schools, it involves teaching the idea that children can change sex, which is a lie embedded in a discourse of changing gender identity. And I think that that's the position that we might be in at the moment, where we are we're putting very, very young children in a position where if they know something not to be true, we're telling them to ignore it. For girls particularly, this we're telling them basically that they have to ignore the boundaries that are in place for them. That that I've brought my daughter up knowing what her sex body is, knowing what it's capable of, and knowing what could potentially happen to her because of her sex body. I've prepared her with regards to pregnancy, to menstruation. I've tried to do all that. I've prepared her for being alert to him and being more relaxed around her, because it's a necessity for survival for girls and women in our society at the moment. And I don't think it is. I don't think teachers are qualified enough to take gender non-conforming children particularly down this path. They need, I'm pretty sure Stella will go into a wee bit more, but they need that whole support package around them. But I certainly don't think that they're qualified enough to be stepping into parents' shoes and kind of making decisions about what their children should be learning with regards to what is true and what is real, and what their own parents are teaching them as well, which is so misaligned with what's going on across education in Scotland, but through my own experience in my daughter's class in primary school. And that's why I set up Parents Across Scotland, because I thought I'm not going to be the only person it's dotted upon this and then decided to like go and looking for other people. So I've shared parents' stories, I've signposted them to different organisations where I can, and I've given them an ear sometimes just to listen and kind of explain what's been happening for them. But I just wanted to share awareness to other parents and anybody really that is looking for information on this, because it's definitely something we need to get a handle on.
The first thing I would like to ask is, how is your daughter?
Do you know, I asked her before I came on here tonight, because I said to her, I'm going to speak about you, and she's like, oh my God, what are you going to say? I said, what would you want to say if you were saying something? She's like, things get better. That was her words, because she's got a wee lovely group of friends now, and she stuck her ground. She's not backed down from it. They've had to back down. She's not being forced to compel her speech at the moment. Anyway, I know it's going to be tricky because she goes to high school next year, so we're kind of trying to prepare how we manage that situation, because it's going to be a lot bigger than what it is in primary school.
Yeah, I've got the very same concern for my child who starts high school after the summer break. That what is already happening and what we're already aware of is going to be magnified. I used to joke with my youngest when I was like collecting them for school and bringing them back home for school, because we came in our journey home past a high school. So the high school usually came out just round about the time that the kids were coming. We were walking the kids home for school. And I used to always joke, say, right, you need to watch those teenagers, because teenagers, they're just a different breed altogether, right? And he's like, all right. So I get my son excited about teenagers, like, oh, you need to watch them because they're and he's like, how do you know? And I was like, I used to be one, and try and have a joke with him, right? And what to expect. Now, the worry I've got is that they go to school, the high school after the summer, and the stories that I'm hearing, and the story about your daughter was, it's terrifying for me. I've taught my kids to look after themselves because, well, that's what I was taught, and it didn't really do me, bar a couple of things that I'm not happy about in my life, it didn't really do me too much damage, Now, in my terms of looking after yourselves is, well, you look after yourself with your mouth, and if you have to, with your hands, right? Because that for me is, if somebody's assaulting you, then you've got a right to defend yourself, right? And I've taught all my kids that, and I won't have them lied to. I mean, it's bad enough that I lied to them about the Tooth Fairy and Santa Claus and everything else, which by the way, they all know now, and my youngest found out at a very early age as a result of what I'm hearing, you know, and it's like, no, I need to protect my kids by being honest with them, because, and we had on a podcast not too long ago, Lucy, just UI and Safe Schools Alliance UK, and we were saying that in days gone by, you were warned to look out for this. If somebody asks you to come and see puppies, you say, no, you run home, or you go an adult, blah, 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 blah. Don't accept sweeties for strangers. Now it's a case that you have to keep secrets for your parents and speak to people who present as something that they're not. I mean, there's flags, alarms, and everything going off in my head, and it's like a case of, where are we as a society? I see what's happening to women. And they've tried to erase the word mother, which again I'm not happy about. And I look at it's the societal rape of women, facilitated by women in power, and I don't agree with it. I don't agree with any of it. And it's a way to get access to kids. So I mean, we've spoke to people from Canada, we've spoke to people from England, obviously people from Scotland. So it seems to be that the common theme is that we don't believe the lie that we're being sold, and we're in the wrong for being who we are and who we have been as a society for an era, you know. And it's worrying as to where we're going. It's good and reassuring that we've got so many people here, even this evening. Thank you everybody for joining. But we need to get the message out more. And we hope to do that. I'm going to invite Eileen, who's put her hand up, just to come in, just to see if there was something. And then we're going to ask Stella O'Malley to speak to us, or speak with us, sorry. So Eileen, hold on. I've took your, you need to unmute, Eileen.
It's right. I'm just going to go back to one of the points that Lucy made. Scottish Government's own figures say that 47% of children report that they were bullied in school, right? At any one stage, right? But only 7% of them said it's got anything to do with homophobia or anything like that. So I've got to ask, what's happening to the other 40%? You know, the kids that are maybe get bullied because they've got ginger hair, or they're a bit plumpy, or they're poor and they don't have the right trainers.
That's exactly what I was saying, Eileen. That's the kids I'm talking about being missed. I think that because our hyper focus is looking at one group, where we've got the potential of missing so many other children.
Yes.
And that's just a massive concern.
And I just wonder, how did we get to this position where only that particular demographic of children is more important?
I don't think it's that I don't know that it's that they're more important. I think that maybe there's been a message put out that places this particular group of children as being extremely vulnerable, in which they are, as all children are vulnerable and due to their age. But there's been quite a focus, I think, on this one group because of some misinformation
and government policy.
Yeah, it's getting in there, and I'm not saying these children shouldn't be on. They need to be under the safeguarding framework, but right now they're sitting on the outside of it. So it means that safeguarding frameworks are not working the way that they should, because instead of being under it with every other child, they're sitting to the outside. So they're not getting the actual adequate support that they need, but then the children that are outside the other end are not getting it either. So it's just a bit of a mess, I think, at the moment, with children at the centre of it.
Thank you both, ladies. I'm now going to ask Stella O'Malley to speak with us. So I'll put the big picture on. Oh, replace the pin, sorry.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you okay. Yeah. So if you just wish to
thank you very much for inviting me, and it was really interesting to hear parents of across Scotland speaking there. I heard the end of it and I kind of gathered where you were coming from, And the last point that was just noted, I just want to take up on it because it's such a very good point. I wrote a book in 2017 about bullying called Bully Proof Kids. And, you know, I've so much experience as a therapist around bullying, and kids are bullied for lots of different reasons. And, you know, for example, like kids are bullied for, like somebody said, for being poor, for being fat, for being thin, for being good looking, for being ugly, for being everything, for being clever, for not being clever. And it's disproportionate to put it all into one thing. It's not appropriate and it's not accurate. So I do think there's, like I say, there's a big gap between, I think you said 41% versus 7%. It's like way too many kids are being missed because one minority has kind of taken over and said, we're the minority. And there's lots of other minorities who don't have such a strong voice and who are just not being heard. And I think that's not fair. I had my own very strong experiences with gender when I was a kid. I was very, from as far back as I go back, like when I was 3 or something, I wanted to be a boy and I was very insistent on it and I was very full on about it. And I lived in a different time where nobody was talking gender. I was born in 1974 and in Dublin, nobody was bringing me to doctors to talk about it. I was just that strange little kid who acted like a boy and insisted she was a boy. And I was very forceful about it. And, you know, like there was an awful lot of things wrong way back in the day when in the 70s and 80s. And yet we did do some things right. And, you know, I'm sure many of you know that picture of the kid from the 1980s who was playing Lego and she's got red hair and she's wearing jeans and she's just an ordinary kid. You know what I mean? We've got a long way from that since now it's pink Lego and blue Lego and things like that. And as it says there, I'll tell you a little bit about myself rather than if you want to bore yourselves reading my bio, I'll tell you about myself. I'm a psychotherapist. I'm based in Ireland and I had weird experiences with gender as a kid and I grew out of them. And I went off and lived my life. I found puberty very, very, very difficult. And it was the making of me because I realized that when I went through puberty, I realized that nature was bigger than me. And that was actually a very profound truth to realize in life. And I needed to realize because I actually thought, because I was very strong-willed, I actually thought I was bigger than nature. And that if I could say I was a boy, I could force the world into me being a boy. They would, which is very like what's happening now. I just thought my personality is going to make this true. And I just looked at anybody who tried to say it wasn't. And that's fine when you're 8. You know what I mean? But on a certain level, you realize you're not that powerful. You don't have any ability to twist people's minds. And actually, you know, the world pushes back. And so it was really difficult for me, but it was good for me. That's the thing. It was really difficult. It was horrible. I was lonely. I was really wretchedly unhappy with my body, deeply filled with self-loathing. It was horrible. And I still think, and yet I became a woman. I became happy in my own skin. I went on to have babies. I went on to kind of not burden myself with a medical transition where I would be still thinking about my gender now and still agonizing about who I was and all that. So it was a better result for me. I'm not saying it's a better result for everybody. I don't know what it's like to be anybody else. I do know that medical transition carries a very heavy burden that like lasts your whole life. And so shouldn't be entered into lightly. And if I had been a kid in Scotland, for example, today, and if I had heard at the age of 10 that there was such a concept called puberty blockers, and you basically only convince doctors through showing them how distressed you are, like just show me the doctor and I'll show you the distress. Like I would have been so assertive. And the thing is, I'm one of those people who remembers what it was like to be a kid. I remember being a kid. And I remember I would impress adults with my force around my being a boy. I remember they'd test me and I would know they were testing me and I would answer appropriately, knowing I was blowing their minds. Kids aren't fools. Like I knew what I was doing. I knew that I was an aberration and I enjoyed it. And I enjoyed looking them in the eye and saying, yeah, well, you know what I mean? That was, don't forget that kids, they know what they're doing. So anyway, had I been told that there was a concept called gender and there was a concept called sex and really sex didn't matter, it was all about your gender, I would have been so bought into the whole thing, like, and I would have been fighting everybody. I would have been arguing with everybody. It's all about being clever and outsmarting people with the words. That would have been right up my street. It would have been such an unfortunate combative focus on myself rather than a focus on the world outside. You know what I mean? What about, you know, other things other than yourself? This kind of individualistic, I'll fight my battle and I'll talk about me for the rest of my life, is probably not very healthy. I went on to become a psychotherapist in my 30s, and I started writing a few books, and I wrote books around parenting. First one was called Cottonwool Kids, and it was about very much performance-based parenting. And then Bully-Proof Kids, which is being actually released in March in the UK. And then I wrote Fragile. But in the midst of all that, I realized that the gender debate had gone a bit wild. And I was always interested in the gender debate because of my own weird experiences as a kid. I always kept an eye just on trans, as this kind of realizing that the people who transitioned were evidently like the way I was when I was a kid. I didn't have a word called gender dysphoria, but I realized, oh, that's what must drive people to do that. Isn't that interesting? Because I left it behind. So I was well aware that there was something. I now know it's called gender dysphoria, whatever. And I remember when the T was added to the LGB in the 90s, and I remember going, why is that happening? That doesn't make sense. Sexual orientation is sexual orientation. What the hell is T jumping onto that? And I remember I'm not gay. And anybody nobody was interested in this point. I remember there was just no interest. It was just, why are you bringing up such a weird point? I was like, that just doesn't make sense. It's like adding, I don't know, soldiers to playgrounds. It's just like, these are two different things. Why are we putting them together? And on I went and I watched the gender thing. And then because of a person called Corey Doty, who was a non-binary person who had a baby, and in Canada being, I would say, a precursor to how Scotland is going, if you wanted to look, you know, the big country beside the small country, the very much emphasis on we're not like the big country, we're like our country. It's, you know what I mean? It's Ireland is doing it to England as well. We're so busy being not England, we're showing how woke we are. And I feel something similar is happening with Scotland. We're so busy not England, we're not going to have those turfs. We're going to be woke. And I see Canada did it to America. Just Canada's extraordinary, how kind of extraordinary deep they've gone. And why I started joining the gender debate was because of a person called Corey Doty, who's non-binary, had a baby and took the Canadian court to court. This is 2017. Took the Canadian government to court for the right to assign this baby, who was perfectly healthy, there was no doubt about the sex of this baby, and to assign that baby as you, which is standing for either unknown or unassigned, because we don't know their gender. And Corey Doty won, took the Canadian government to court to assign the baby, who's called Cyril Doty, as you. And I read this and I thought, oh my God. Oh my God, oh my God, we're living in Alice in Wonderland, like black is white and up is down. And I thought I have to, even though I was in the media because I wrote all these books and I was in the, always, writing and speaking in the media. And I was well aware everybody told me, don't go near this, just don't go near it. Funnily enough, everybody except my husband, he said, go for it. I was like, yeah, I will, which was quite nice. But then after the article, I was invited to do a film called Trans Kids, It's Time to Talk. And so started 2018, and in we went into 2018. I knew this was mad. I knew this was a very, very incendiary, very heightened kind of world. I had no idea how deep it went. And the level of the dirty tricks that were carried out during 2018 to stop that film to get made. And the premise of the film was there's a 4,000% increase of girls seeking to medically treat. Could any of those girls be like me? That was it. That was the big, shocking, shut this person down, she's a transphobic bigot. Could any of the girls of that 4,000% be like me? Because I had a very intense experience and I actually needed to go through puberty. I needed that reckoning. And I was shocked. And they had nothing on me because all I had written in the media was parenting, mental health parenting. That's all I'd ever written about. They had nothing to get me on. And yet they still said I was a transphobic bigot. And they still contacted not only the people above us in Channel 4, but they went right up to the director of Channel 4 to say, you know, there's a problematic program going on. Maybe you're not aware of it. They contacted everybody we contacted to say, don't speak to them. There was a kind of an email sent around saying, don't talk to this crowd. They contacted everybody we wanted to speak to say no. Why? Because they thought this crowd, us, won't get the film made if you can't get both sides. And they refused to talk to us to ensure that we didn't get both sides. It was horrible, horrible event. And, you know, the film is now out. We got it made and it went out in November 2018. And, you know, what we did was we incorporated the silencing of them into the film. We showed how we were being silenced, and that's how we got around it. And from then on, I've kind of immersed myself in the gender world. And after you know, I was contacted by so many people after the film. I was contacted by an awful lot of people who I put under the banner Lost in Transition. And Lost in Transition in my world is, these are people, and it's, you know, the stats bear me out, that around about 9 or 10 years, maybe 7 to 10 years after transition, there's a slump, because the intensity of the obsession with the gender has worn off. And now they're just thinking, I'm taking drugs, they make me feel sick, I'm constantly going to the doctors, I'm always in doctors' waiting rooms, I'm always thinking about my body, I'm putting petrol in the diesel tank, and I'm continuously doing it, and it's making me sick in a million different, small, niggling, constant reasons. And I'm sick of it. And I don't know what the whole big thing point was. Was there another way? Could I have kind of got around this? And anybody who knows anything, I'm a psychotherapist, anybody who knows anything about psychology would say, yeah, more often than not, yes, if you're very committed, you would probably be able to pull yourself out of something, but it takes an awful lot of focus. It does take an awful lot of effort to pull yourself out of a deep fixation. And that's what it is. It's a grip on you. And so those people contacted me in their hordes after the film. And also an awful lot of parents contacted me who were very worried about their kids and who were worried about like how their kids were being socially transitioned in schools and how their kids were being kind of led to believe. And there's a concept called cruel optimism, and there's a concept called toxic positivity. And both of those come to my mind a lot when I think about these kids. You see it in the Jazz Jennings series in a big way. So cruel optimism is when people say, oh, it'll get better. Oh yeah, it'll get better. And it's like, no, it won't. I'm sick and I'm getting sicker. It's not going to get better. And you're actually cruel and you're pretending that this is all fine. And the same with toxic positivity, that it's just pretending things are going to be fine when actually it's blindingly obvious it won't. And so pretending to somebody that actually medical transition is an easy path is cruel, and it's inappropriate, and it's inaccurate. And it's selling innocent, like Jazz Jennings, I would say, who I have nothing but sympathy for. It's selling them a wrong path that's going to be nothing but difficulty. That kid is in a really hard time as far as I can see. She really looks to me as if she's really got it hard. And I just think, honestly, she was egged on by this toxic positivity that told her it'll all be great. You just think hard enough. And it feels like it's part of that Disney culture of, if you just wish hard enough, it'll be okay. And it's not fair, because 4-year-olds think this, 8-year-olds think, if I'm just very good, my wishes will come true. And it's our jobs as adults to allow them have those wishes, but Jesus, don't let them act on them in an irreversible way. You know what I mean? And even when you're allowing them, let's not go to town on it. I liked what David was saying. Let's not go too mad on this whole, if you wish hard enough. Like, you know what I mean? Because I think this entire Disney childhood has led an awful lot of children to think that they might be able to actually become the opposite sex. So I remember a conversation with one kid, and the mother was telling me about it. And the mother was saying to the kid, if you take testosterone, she was a girl, the girl was born a girl. If you take testosterone, it's going to be very hard on your body. You're going to have vaginal infections. You're going to have, your body will be really quite severely impacted. Now, the impact of testosterone on the female body is vicious. It's been well documented. If you even go back to the East German gymnasts, it was really hard on their bodies. And this kid, because she's been told in this toxic positivity and this kind of world where we can play with the truth, this kid said, oh no, it won't hurt my body because I'll be a boy. And I was like, oh my God, this is an intelligent kid who thought, I'm a boy, so it won't hurt my body. It would only hurt the girls' bodies. And I'm a boy because I think it. And do you remember when I said, I thought I could force the world into my way of thinking? And I got a slap around the face of, no, you can't. And it was horrible, but it was necessary. These kids aren't getting it. They're being led into believing, yeah, you're right. You're right. And it's like, that's not true. Where will that kid who thought that's not going to happen to me because I'm really a boy, where will that kid be when they're in a really difficult position medically because of testosterone? Who'll be around them then? You know what I mean? It'll be the parents who were worried about it in the first place and were told to shut up and put up because we're being positive here and that's what's needed. Because, this affirmative therapy kind of concept where we basically affirm everything the child says, I think it should be confirmative, because what they're doing is they're confirming every thought or belief the child says. And that's not appropriate, because we need to stay in reality if we're going to help people. And if you want to keep somebody smiling, you can just tell them everything they say is great, but it's not in the long term good for them. And there's a horrible day when they realize, I have been led down a garden path and now I'm in real trouble. And I think it's really cruel to kind of inflict that sort of aspect onto kids. And so when I went on, I went to the D-Trans conference in Manchester 2019, and I met some parents. And they said, any chance you're doing some groups for parents? And so I said, yeah, sure. But I was so busy. I was like, kind of, how do I fit this in? How do I even do this? Then, of course, March 2020 happened and the pandemic happened. And they contacted me almost immediately. And I said, all right, I could do them on Zoom. I've suddenly got no work to do. Right, okay. So I started doing, and we started an organization called the Gender Dysphoria Support Network. And I started doing support meetings for parents. And it was supposed to be 1 meeting a week. And within 2 weeks, it was 2 meetings a week. Then it was 3 meetings a week, 4 meetings a week, 5 meetings a week. It was meeting after meeting after meeting. And the parents were all saying the same thing. My quirky, kind of gender non-conforming, socially awkward, intelligent kid has been caught up in something. And they've got loads of diagnoses. And they're not really, I don't know your child parents across Scotland, but I think they're not really like me and your child, because we're a kind of a type. I was a classic gender dysphoric kid. You could be anybody. It comes in at a young age, and you're just the opposite from the beginning. This was a whole other type. This was the Lisa Littman ROGD type. And these were teenagers who had loads of diagnoses, who were awkward, intelligent, real, the nerdy type. They were in every one of our classrooms. They're lovely, but they're vulnerable, and they're naive, and they're gullible. They're a type. Those kids got caught into something. Now, the second type of kids, which is myself, and I think, am I right in thinking it's your kid, Parents Across Scotland? Is that, because I didn't hear the beginning of your story.
No, well, she is gender non-conforming as well, though, so yeah.
But was she gender non-conforming from like toddlerhood, or from?
Well, see, she's only 11 just now, so she's still not in that teen stage, but for the last maybe 6 years or so, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll just talk a little bit about that, just to kind of give it. So like that, a kid like that, like let's say since she's 5 or something like that, right? She is like me, which is just, we were just those quirky little kids who were just gender non-conforming, didn't like the thing, pushed against it, right? Those kids, which is me and your kid, are particularly vulnerable, because they're walking into puberty going, whoa, there's a whole thing going on. These are my people. So they're walking and thinking, I'm the real deal. I was this when I was 5. And it's like, no offense to the 11-year-old, but read the literature. You're classic. You're just going to grow out of it. You know what I mean? If you weren't in this crazy generation, you would, you're just, you know what I mean? You're just the gender non-conforming kid who's all over the literature. She's in Little Women. She's in all famous 5. They're all over the place, those kids. And then there's a second cohort. And I often think people don't realize that there's 2 groups. That's why I like to be at pains to point it out, that there's the classic tomboy, or, the sissy girl for the boys. And they generally grow out of it. A lot of them grow up to be gay. I didn't happen to be, but a lot of them do. And off they go in their life. Then there's this ROGD kid who is rapid onset gender dysphoria, who basically were just as girly as anybody else, and it suddenly comes on and becomes on through the internet, and they're a completely different type, and they're very socially awkward, they're very naive, they generally have other diagnoses like anxiety, and they have autism, and lots of other diagnoses like that generally afflicts them. 63% of them have other actual clinical diagnoses, so it's very much they have other issues, and they're very vulnerable. And so those two groups are kind of finding each other among this whole queer theory thing. And it's turned into a real safeguarding mess for these kids. They go online and they're finding it on TikTok and Snapchat, they're finding it everywhere. And we need to be very careful. So when I started these meetings in 2020, I couldn't get over how many parents were all saying the same thing. And the doctors were just waving them away. And the schools were transitioning them. And the schools were saying, I don't know why you're being so hateful. You were never hateful before. And it's like, well, hang on a second. If this is a loving and engaged parent who was always really, really good, why would you suddenly think that this new thing, never before in the history of mankind have schools transitioned children socially? It's a heavy psychosocial, intervention. It shouldn't be undertaken without clinical supervision. Schools have suddenly started doing it with no evidence, with no kind of reason that this should be. And it hasn't worked out because an awful lot of kids are now desisting and detransitioning. And so it's become a mess. And when I realized that there was such a need for so many parents and such distress, I founded GenSpect, which is a kind of an alliance of all the parents groups around the world. And we're now representing 18 different parents groups from 16 different countries. And all those, that's thousands of parents, and it's genspect.org. And all the parents are saying the same thing, that authorities, whether they're social workers or they're teachers or they're doctors, are dismissing the parent, even though these parents are generally very high functioning, very loving, very engaged, educated parents. These are not problematic parents. And it's like, they're perfect parents, but one thing they're weird on is this. And this is the thing that that's how the schools interpret it, as opposed to maybe, perhaps, you've no evidence base to back up your ideas of social transitioning. Maybe you've got it wrong. Maybe when thousands of parents are all saying the same thing, maybe we should listen to the parents and say, hang on, if thousands of loving and engaged parents who've been proved to be loving and engaged because of their past record with their kids, why wouldn't we listen to them and say, hang on a second, maybe we've got it wrong? So yeah, and I do want Scottish parents to know that in GenSpect, we're doing a strong schools program. We go to schools. We found the staff in schools have been very interested in us coming in. We give staff training. We have a GenSpect schools guidance. If you go on to GenSpect and look for the guidance, you'll find it. And we go into the schools, and we found the schools have been surprisingly welcoming. And they've said, lovely to hear a bit of fact. Lovely to hear it. And again, yeah, if you go into support there, and if you have a look at the guidance, do you see down there the guidance? We've got guidance for parents and we've got guidance for schools. But I really think for schools, if you go down a bit, you'll see the schools. For schools, I have to say in Scotland, that's where I think there could be, see those guidances. And there's one there. Go down a bit.
Friends and family, and support schools.
Yeah, that one. The one for schools, actually, and colleges, because we're going in. And so, yeah, you can look at it yourselves, but it is very helpful for the schools. And we've found that when we give staff training, we've been really surprised by how many of the schools have said, thank you very much. They've been very receptive. They've recommended us to other schools. It's taken off, and it's taken off very quickly. And that will see, we've got sex and gender. We do the whole thing. So we cover whatever is mandated by the schools. And we cover the famous DSDs, the intersex. You know what I mean? So we cover it all in it. And we talk about it all, basically. We really do. And yeah, what has been the big revelation is the schools haven't been resistant. And what we realized was there's generally one or two zealots who don't know much, who are generally very young, frankly, and haven't had much experience. They get on their high horse about it, and everybody else is silenced. And what we found with the GenSpect school guidance and stuff, and going into the staff. So if you know schools, make sure you recommend the guidance. And make sure you say, GenSpect, go into schools if you ever want some staff training. And we do it through Zoom, and we found it's been really, really effective. And I just want to finish on that, but I want to say that if at all possible, I think it's the schools is where we need to focus on. I think it's the schools where it's like this is a movement that has been led by well-meaning adults, and the well-meaning adults presume being trans is being gay, and they haven't got further than that sentence. And we go into that in the school's guidance. We go into, well, no, trans is not gay, and I'll tell you why, because it requires, for example, a lifelong medical intervention. Yeah. So I think if at all possible, that's where we should all focus. I think there's an awful lot of conversation between, with women like myself speaking to other women like myself, and we need to get out of there, get into the schools and start speaking to all these middle ground people who are just wide-eyed going, I'm afraid to say anything. I don't understand. It always reminds me of, funnily enough, I get shot for saying this, but there you go. I say a lot of things I get shot for. It always reminds me of Northern Ireland politics, where everybody just goes, I can't say anything. It's so complex. I have no idea. It's so frightening. I can't even speak. And that's the same as gender. Nobody says a word. They just silence, I can't. And they get that wide-eyed fear of, I don't dare mention anything. And I'll leave it to the experts. And it's like, no way, no way. You parents are the experts of their children, and they need to keep their authority. And I know you could say Scotland has swiped it from them. And I think we've thousands of years behind us. I really think that we can, with some organization, we can regroup and make sure that parents have the authority that they've always had before.
Thank you, Stella. I've invited Denise because you missed Denise's address earlier on. She was saying that she had Sinead Watson on, who is a detransitioner. So I've invited Denise to come in to have a comment. So Denise, if you unmute, and then Eileen, I'll ask you to unmute after Denise and give a comment to Stella, please. So Denise, first of all.
Hi, Stella. That's totally fascinating, actually. Really, really interesting. And we just interviewed, we have a show called The Cauldron, and we interviewed Sinead Watson on it. And one of the things that she told us is interesting about testosterone. That when she got it, she started being very angry and kind of, she thought it was good. She had a little bit of euphoria and she thought it was good. And she was angry and snappy with people and actually punched things and things like that. But she thought it was fine. But the testosterone had that effect on her. And then when she came off it, she said about, I asked if she had a menstrual cycle, and she said she would just burst into floods of tears all the time. So it's kind of like your body would fight back. So I read something else about, somebody when they tried to change, they took they had surgeries and medication, but your body fights back all the time because your body knows what sex is and it just tries to reassert its sex. So, what you were describing is that constant battle that these people have for the rest of their lives. And the other thing you said is we're selling them a lie. And that's the problem, where adults are selling children lies and children believe it. They believe they have other problems and they believe that all their problems will be solved. And there's this silver bullet. And instead, what they're going to end up with is health problems in a lifetime of fighting against nature. What you said about your puberty and, you understood nature. And I think you do have to come to terms with nature and understand how fantastic nature is and how fantastic a female or male body is, and just come to terms with it. And puberty is a hard time. And I think it's a hard time for females because men grow taller and stronger. During puberty, and we grow comparatively weaker and we bleed. Puberty isn't fun. So you can kind of see why you don't want to be like a female, and the male's a good option. And we were saying earlier about pornography, and for girls now, and they're seeing really horrible, violent pornography, and you can quite understand why you don't want to be a girl, a female, but don't lie to the children. Don't sell them a lie. just don't tell them a lie. They cannot change sex. That's what
Yeah.
hurts me, upsets me, the lying to children.
And it's kind of, it feels outrageous. You're so right about testosterone and estrogen. It felt a bit outrageous to me that I was the fastest, the best at football, the strongest. And then my body turned me into this roundy kind of boobs and menstruation. And all the boys that I used to be able to whip were suddenly beating me.
I know.
That's not fair. It was so deeply not fair, man. They got bigger and stronger and faster. And I didn't. And it's like, you know what I mean? Like, that's horrible as a kid.
Yeah. I had the same thing because we used to do quite a lot of fighting when I was young, and I was a good fighter and I could fight all the boys and win, you know. And then puberty hit. My career as a fighter was over.
Yeah, me too.
Furious.
But I try.
You know, and I really didn't like sex. You know, when I heard about what it was, I was like, "Whoa, wait! I'm not doing any of that." You know, so yeah, it isn't a fun time. But I think what you were saying is just excellent. Like, you have to go through it and come to terms with what you are.
Can I take you just one more point that you just raised? You know, Carol Hooven wrote a brilliant book. Dr. Carol Hooven, I don't think she's from Harvard or something. She wrote a book called Testosterone. It was released a couple of months ago, about 6 months ago. And it's just about the impact of testosterone on the body. And it's on the male body, on anybody. And you're right, it's almost like cocaine for women, insofar as you feel euphoric, you feel strong, but you feel irritable, you feel fighty, you know what I mean? And it's amazing how much estrogen makes you more connected and weepy. And I had no idea of the impact of hormones on the body. I'd love to read the equivalent of what's estrogen doing, but that testosterone book. And so when a girl who feels insecure gets testosterone, it's very alluring because they feel strong and irritable and kind of powerful, and their libido shoots up, by the way. And I think there's nothing kind of more alluring and bewitching for a child to hear that there's a pill you can take and you're going to be somebody else. And you're going to be maybe like one of those influencers you see on YouTube, and it's going to be somebody different, and nobody would be able to talk about the old you. You know, the old embarrassing you that didn't have friends and was a bit shy and it was a bit all over the place. Nobody would be able to talk about that because you'll have a new name and a new identity. You're going to be a new person. That is just a mind-meltingly beguiling idea for an awkward, distressed, unhappy adolescent. And that's what they're being told. I just think it's deeply inappropriate.
The thing you were saying about Gen Spec in schools, we're coming up to have council elections in May this year, and we're really hoping to get a lot of people that are against the gender ideology, queer theory, in being imposed in schools. So maybe if we get good councillors elected, we can have Gen Spec in all our schools.
Yeah. I agree. You're muted there, Tweet Street. That's funny. Oh, maybe you've.
I've clicked my mute on my headset. Sorry, I'm saying that's maybe something that we can look to try and exhaust here in Scotland because it's going so well and these are already formed. It's something that we could maybe look to tie in with. Stella, if it would be something you'd be interested in, because we're trying
Delighted.
to do. Right, well, we'll carry on this discussion by DM and see if there's something we could do going forward. Eileen, was there something you would like to ask Stella?
Yeah, just a couple of things, Stella. Right, I had, and this was like in the early 2000s, I had come, because this isn't the first time that Scottish Government have tried this, by the way. They did a big go back in about 2003 with the kind of really explicit sex education, you know, trying to put it in place then. And this time, I mean, it's no sex education, it's an instructional manual on kink that they're trying to put in. But I'd come across this study of homosexuals, boys. They studied them from age, we followed them up from age 13 up to age 21. And at age 13, 17% of those boys thought that they might be gay. But age 17, that had dropped to 5%. And by age 21, it actually come down to 2% who were absolutely certain that they were gay. Now, the important thing was nobody had done anything with this cohort of boys, right? They just left them be, right? Nobody reinforced anything. They just let them alone. And my worry is, you know, with kids who are maybe saying, oh, I think I'm trans, right? Or these kids could be gay and they're going to trans the gay away. For me, it smacks a bit of eugenics, to be honest with you. And I really worry about that. And the other thing, you know, I wanted to bring up was, you were talking about, you know, adults wanting to do the right thing and be nice and all that, and the professionals. And I'm really particularly worried about policy capture of institutions. And I was wondering if, you know, you might have something to say about that. Like, for example, we're finding that education is policy captured. The teachers' unions are policy captured. The police are policy captured. The NHS is policy captured. The local authorities are all policy captured. And it is by groups of lobbyists, right? And we also wonder, where's Big Pharma coming in on this? Because as far as we're aware, we've got the NHS over here, but in America and in Canada, this is a big money maker, right? And the way I'm looking at it, these folk, they'd saturated the adult market and they were looking for new markets. There's no morality in it for them, right? It's just a way of doing business. And there's gazillions to be made. It takes apparently £1.4 million or $1 million in America or Canada, you know, for a kid to be transed. And it's something that I worry about deeply. And I was wondering if you'd any comment on that, Stella, you know, about the influence of the lobbyist groups and Big Pharma above it all, and whether they're sitting there like vultures, you know, waiting to pick off children as their new market.
I have loads to say about it. I do think it's a very, very interesting subject. I think I haven't made up my mind really what's going on with Big Pharma. Part of me just thinks it landed on their lap and they're delighted. Another part of me thinks without a doubt, 100%, there's certain billionaire trans women who are, you know, noted in Helen Joyce's book Trans, where they're trans women who have without a doubt made it their business to fund a huge amount of lobbying. And when you look at the lobbying and the policy capture, that's when you're kind of, it takes your breath away when you study it, because you go, oh my God, this was incredibly well thought out. This was incredibly strategic. And it's kind of shocking because you go, I didn't see it coming. Now, I've studied it an awful lot, and I do think the people who are involved in the kind of trans world are very often a certain type of personality who would be strategic, who are amazing on computers. I run a podcast with Sasha Ayad, and we've interviewed all the pioneers from back in the 80s and 90s, and they all got cancelled in the early 2000s. These are people like Mike Bailey and Ken Zucker and stuff like that. And they got very badly treated. And it was like they got cancel culture before anybody else did, if you follow me. And they kind of realized that these are very, very obsessive people who, when they have you in their sights, they will take you down. And when they have strategy in their sights, they will take you down. And so if any of you, I think it's a really good film, and I really recommend it if anybody wants to watch it. Something like When George Became Julia. It's the first ever documentary on trans, and BBC 1980, and it follows a trans woman. And the trans woman changes from George to Julia, and they follow her every 7 years. And she had full reassignment surgery, and she wanted to become a woman. She fought every single organization she worked with for the right to go to the toilet, for the right to be called a woman, for the right for this. Why? Because she was fixated. And so, you know, on one level, I would say, yeah, the policy is all captured. And then I meet them. I've met an awful lot of detransitioners who literally changed the policy of their schools, and they think, I was fixated, and I made everybody else become fixated. What I would argue was wrong was their fixation was their fixation. The schools, the doctors, they should have been the people in authority. They should have been the wall that's saying, you know, your fixation seems to be very intense, but we're not going to change our entire policy around you.
Yes.
And that's where I think they fell down. The fixation came, but in a way, we fell down by allowing people who are fixated to run policies. And people who are fixated to run policies that would suit one person and wouldn't suit 99 people. And to allow that to happen again and again and again in many different ways. So that was a very garbled answer of saying, I'm not sure about this. It's a fascinating subject, but I'm not sure how much it is strategic or how much it is very fixated individuals and sloppy society that seems to think, I'll just be kind for this person and I will disregard the policies that were thought out for 20 years. There's something about society that I think is reflected in the way this has happened.
Stella, we find ourselves in a position where we now have a woman called Shirley Ann Somerville, who is in charge of education, you know, in this country. Right? Now, prior to that, wasn't even her remit, right? But she took it on and she had over 200 meetings with groups of lobbyists, BT, right? Stonewall, right? Scottish Trans Alliance, right? All of those, you know, those niche groups, over 200 meetings in order to set policy for GI, for self-ID, you know, for sex education, right? And they're saying, oh, but we have consulted. There wasn't a women's group consulted. There wasn't a parents group consulted. And, you know, they actually think, or Shona Robson thinks, that in the past week, I think there was something like 6 half-hour meetings or something like that. Some of the, you know, the groups that are representing women, right? And they're not for turning, right? What they're saying is, well, it's only guidance, right? It's up to, you know, the local authorities, you know, how they're going to do this, or it's up to the organisations how they're going to do this. And you get the organisations saying, oh, but it's government that's saying that we've got to do it, right? And it's a circular argument that we're getting all the time. Now, this GRE self-ID, we understand it's going to be introduced to Parliament quite soon, right? A lot sooner than we were all thinking, right? And there has been no meaningful consultation on it. And it looks as if they are going to go ahead, they are going to force this through, and this is going to be imposed, you know, on the adult women, right? But there is going to be a knock-on effect on children in school because of GRE and self-ID. And I just feel we have got to stop this. The adults have got to take over again, right? Be that adult women, adult men, and we have got to say this stops.
And it's basically a few obsessive individuals are changing policy, and it's not being. People aren't standing up and being adult and saying, no, I feel sorry for you, but we're not going to change the entire institution for you because that doesn't make sense.
Ladies, thank you so much. We've ran over, and there was a planned break. I'm not going to take that break because I don't want to keep people here too much longer. I would like David to come in and because he's got a different view on it, or a slightly different view than others that we've heard so far. And then I'll invite Alan, who's requested to speak, to come back in after David. So I'm going to unpin you from the main screen, ladies, and I'll put David on. Okay.
Okay.
Evening. Just a quickie, listening to everything that's been said, there's issues with the children. The children are being led up a garden path. You know, it's in my opinion, it's predominantly a fad. You know, most of them will trans up, or won't be trans, they'll go away as the years go on. The issue for me is more the safeguarding aspect. It's the rights of women and girls that have been taken away, just carte blanche. And they're using the excuse that, oh, we're looking after trans children, vulnerable children. It's not that they're taking away women's rights. And we can't argue this, we can't say anything about it. My mother's disabled. My mother spends a lot of time in hospital. And anybody now that can claim to be female is able to look after my mother. My mother's vulnerable, she can't, to a certain extent, she can't really look after herself. And she can be in a hospital and anybody comes in, beard and bollocks, can claim it be a woman and have access to my mother. The trans children thing is just a gateway. It's a way for these people to put an ideology in to force us to be kind. And it's something I just seriously disagree with. seriously, and I don't like the fact that they're using children to take away women's rights. I've got 2 daughters, a couple of sisters, so many nieces, 4, 5, I've got 4 nieces, and their rights have went, for my lifetime, they've always had rights, to literally the last couple of years with Nicola Sturgeon, they've got nothing. And if we complain as a woman, as a man, we're bigots, we're homophobes, we're transphobes, or whatever they would like to say to quiet us down, to stop us having an argument, or to stop us keeping the status quo, if you like. There's nothing to say that children can't be trans. Why the erosion of women's rights? The safeguarding measures. Why the erosion of that to allow somebody to become trans, to take puberty blockers or to wear a dress? I just cannot get my head around why we're following their logical argument that it's all about children, safeguarding the children, when the very fact is they're taking away every safeguarding right that's ever been there. There's a reason why women have safe spaces. There's a reason why they don't have communal changing areas, they have separate, because men are perverts. Men are criminals when it comes to women. They're coercive, they're abusive. This isn't a subjective opinion. This is a fact. This is a fact born out of thousands and thousands of years. And yet, a couple of half-wits suddenly in a position that the SNP are railroading us. This is what's happening. If you don't like it, you're take your pick. Some sort of bigot, some sort of phobe. Because I would like my daughter to safely go to a swimming pool and not be subjected to a man. Regardless of anything else, just that's it. Not be subjected to a man, that's it. I don't need any other descriptor in this. And I hate the fact that they keep going, oh, but what about the children? Some of these children are confused. Well, that as may well be. Why should that mean that my wife can't go to a swimming pool? My daughter can't go to a sports facility? Why should my daughter compete against a man in a swimming pool? Or I keep using swimming as if it's only sport. Take your pick, any sort of sporting activity. Why should my daughter compete against somebody that is inherently superior in a biological sense, just because he puts on a bit of lippy and his long hair? I cannot understand why we keep looking at the point that they bring up, oh, it's for the children, we're doing this for children. And the statistics state that there's only so many children, very, very, very small percentage eventually continue to would continue to transition through the intervention. Why we use that is, I can go into CNA, but Marks and Spencer, CNA's did. I can go into Marks and Spencer's and go into women's change room and just sit there like that all day. I can't get my head around that.
David, I share some of the views that you've shared there. It's a worry. I'm going to bring Alan back in. He had his hand up previously. I'm going to say thanks for the minute, David, and I'll leave you on screen in case Alan has got something to come back with on what you were saying. All right, so I'll bring Alan back in.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep, on you go.
Yeah, it was just on how important the council elections are going to be for this whole debate. I mean, we were talking about policy there, and policy costs money. And I've just had word that Dundee City Council has just cut 22 specialist jobs from schools, including speech therapy. Now, speech therapy is not just about teaching people to speak, it also watches children swallowing to make sure they've got a safe swallow, so they're safe to eat. So it's a very important job. Now, if they're prioritising the trans over safety of the children, that is very dangerous. We really need to get people into the council elections, into the council chambers, to make sure that when there's cuts being made, it's cuts that are made that are not a danger to our children and the citizens of the city. So it's very, the council is going to be very powerful this year, more powerful than it's ever been before because of this debate. And we have to be in there to make sure the citizens are safe, and we can stop the trans GRA there at that stage.
I've invited Denise back in because Denise also mentioned about the importance of the council elections. Denise, are you going to be running in those council elections?
No, I'm going to help people because, you know, actually when people are running in their wards, you kind of need somebody to coordinate and help everybody. So I've already been helping people, just going, getting them to stand, they're doing vetting and that kind of thing. And so once I know who all the gender critical candidates are, then I'll be helping them.
Thank you so much, Denise. David, is there anything you would like to come back to? No, you're all right. I'm going to ask any other members of the audience if they would like to speak, make a statement or ask a question of any of the people that have spoke already. So if you put your hands up, if you raise your hands, I will get through you one at a time. So you can start now. And if there's no hands going up, then it looks as if we'll be getting finished right on time. David, I'm going to take you off the screen now, mate. It's just taking me a wee bit of time to figure out how to do it, because you're my main speaker, right? So I'll put that onto me. Replace pin. Right. So if anybody would like to speak, raise your hand and I'll go through.
I'm really sorry I can't be there in person. I hope you have a really good chat. The main contribution that I wanted to make was to say that if you create a special class of people who can't be questioned, whether they're celebrities, priests, or any other category, and say they can't be questioned on issues of child protection, then predators will run to join that class. It's not that priests, teachers, sports coaches, celebrities are more likely to be predators. It's that once a protected class who can't be questioned is created, predators will race to join that class. Gender ideology is creating such a class.
Right, we've no got anybody that's got a hand raised either on the electronic side of it and on the visual side of it. No, there's nobody else. So on that note, I'm going to bring to a close this evening's Not With My Child Parent Forum. This is our January forum. I will say thank you sincerely to everybody who's taken the time to speak and also to taking the time to listen. More of these as we go through, one in February, and ultimately finishing on Mother's Day to send the strongest message that we can for this Parents Forum. But just to keep everybody assured that I will do all in my power to make the biggest noise in the protection of children's rights and women's rights.
And that concludes our January Parent Forum, Not With My Child. Look out for more for Fleet Street in a February Not With My Child edition. And look out for more for Fleet Street in general. Good night, everybody.